Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Suzanne Cox. I'm the Program Director of the Master of Science in Biomedical Informatics here at the University of Chicago. Thanks so much for joining us. And I want to say hi to everybody who's on Facebook, joining us in a live stream. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our monthly seminar series that we have every month. This time, it's for special topics in biomedical informatics. And we're so glad that you all could join us tonight for this special presentation. We have a great panel put together tonight who are going to be discussing healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship around informatics. So I'm going to introduce the panelists really quickly, and then they're going to introduce themselves and talk a little bit more about their organizations as we get started. And then moderating tonight is our faculty director, Sam Volchenbaum, who's a pediatric oncologist at the University of Chicago Medicine. He's also the director of the Center for Research Informatics at the university, and he is the creator of our master's program, and we're really grateful that he could come tonight. He's also an entrepreneur. He'll tell you more about his background as well. So on the panel tonight, we have Steve Lehman, who's an assistant director at the University of Chicago Polsky Center, which is our Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We have Arun Bhatia, who's the program director from Matter. And we have Dr. Chen Kai Kao, who is a hospitalist at the University of Chicago Medicine. He's the associate CMIO at the hospital, and he's also an instructor in our program. And he teaches our healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship class. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you guys to do a little introduction of yourself, and to Sam, who'll be moderating. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. So I'm really happy everybody came out tonight, and I'm glad that we have this great panel together. What I'd like to do is I want to start by having everyone, myself included, give a little bit of our origin story so that you can hear how each of us got to this point in our careers, because I think it's useful for other people to hear the serendipitous and creative routes that people have taken to get where they are. And then we'll spend most of the time, I think, talking about some of the issues around entrepreneurship and innovation in healthcare. And I think you'll have you'll get a lot of insight from the folks that are here, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. A couple of things about the rules of engagement. I would hope that people will feel free to raise their hands and ask questions. We'll have a mic to pass around. I can repeat the questions. You can use the online joinqa.com to ask questions as well, and I think we have a lot of people that are watching this virtually that will want to ask questions that way. So with that being said, I think we'll get started. So for myself, I'm a pediatric oncologist, so I went to school to be a physician and to take care of kids with cancer. And during that process, I was always driven to try to do more things in automated fashion. And this is now 25 years ago, so there wasn't a lot of automated ways or like electronic ways of doing things, but I always found myself drawn to trying to come up with better ways to make things happen. And I'm sure Kai has similar stories where for the first time you take a note and write it and put a piece of paper through the printer in the hospital, everybody thinks you're a wizard because you've written this electronic note. I think we all have had those experiences, and we got to see the revolution of electronic health records, both the good and the bad, and we have a lot of experiences from that. So when I finished my oncology training, I went ahead and formalized my education by doing a master's in biomedical informatics, and that really gave me the tools that I needed then to actually speak with some authority on some of these important issues around security and privacy and HIPAA compliance and all the things that are the tools of our trade that are so important, things that you would also learn going through our curriculum that are going to be so important to help you develop this career. And then for the last 10 years, I've been at the University of Chicago, and for the last 6, I've been running the Center for Research Informatics. And the CRI is a 40-person group in the Biological Sciences Division that really cross-cuts along many different areas important to informatics research. We do high-performance computing, we do HIPAA-compliant storage, we have applications development, we run a data warehouse, we do bioinformatics. And by having all these things under one roof, we're able to really matrix our capabilities and able to do things in a much more nimble fashion than many groups because we can all work together. It's also given me a front seat to a lot of interesting entrepreneurship and commercialization opportunities, seeing many things come through our center that people use our group to get data to develop a research project, which then can turn into a business. A great example is Donna Edelson's a company where They took data from our data warehouse and developed an algorithm that could actually predict patients that were going to have a cardiac arrest. And they were only able to develop this prediction algorithm by using some really well-curated data from our data warehouse. And then by using that data and developing an algorithm, they were able to start, Donna was able to start a very successful company that's based on using this algorithm to detect cardiac arrest. So that's given me a lot of incentive to try to be more involved in these activities, because I can see this is a really good jumping off point for people that want to start businesses. For my own personal interests, I'm very much interested in clinical trials and how clinical trials are run and how we execute them. There's a lot of inefficiencies in the clinical trial process, and one of the things that I noticed early on was that we continue to collect data for clinical trials in a very inefficient way through paper-based forms and through paper-based surveys. And so about 2.5 years ago, I started a company called Litmus Health that is dedicated to using Fitbits and other wearables to collect data for clinical trials, and to do so in a way that's standardized and allows the data to be then used for clinical trials and then to be shared amongst the various regulatory agencies that need those data. You know, as a startup, we have the same problems that all startups have with funding and CTOs that come and go and all sorts of issues. But those are all the things that we'll hear about tonight and all the issues that come whenever you start a business. So that's my story, and I think I'd like to go down the line. I know that everybody here has a rich history that they could share. And so if everybody could spend sort of 3 to 5 minutes going through how you got it. You don't have to talk as fast as I do if you don't want to. But Kai, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. Thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. So my name is Chen Kai Kao. I usually just go by Kai, make it easier for everyone. I am an internist by training and also serve as associate CMIO in my institution, University of Chicago Medicine. So in this role, you know, I got contacted by multiple different startups. When I say startups, I'm talking about, you know, brand new companies, but also sometimes the bigger companies spin off. And sometimes I think some of these products have amazing ideas. But sometimes some of these ideas are just not so great. And you can see there's a clear gap between the solution they provide and the problem they want to solve. So the reason why I started this course about healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship in the master program is hoping that we can teach students how to define and discover a problem first before you come up with a solution and trying to find a problem to solve. Because more commonly, for example, 3D printing is hot. Then people start to think about, can we 3D print everything? And then so you really apply a solution and trying to find a problem to solve. But what happens in that regard is, you know, the newest technology is not always the best solution for everything. So you often backfire later on because there's a better solution, maybe much easier, much cheaper, and eventually the startup wouldn't be successful in the market. So that's something we want to teach to our students for. And on top of that, informatics has been my passion. It really helped me a lot in clinical trials, helped me to launch the telemedicine program for international patients. There's a lot of applications, a lot of room for innovation. One thing I often say in the class is, you know, not everyone need to be entrepreneurs, but every one of us should try to be an innovator in whatever we do. Try to improve things. It doesn't need to be a company, but whatever we do, whatever we innovate, can make our life or our colleagues' life better. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Arun Bhatia from Matter. Glad to have you, such a full room tonight. This is great. So a little bit about, you know, my background. Actually, entrepreneurship was probably the last thing on my mind when I first started off my career. So I actually started off in the life sciences. I was a biochemistry, biology undergrad, did my master's degree in biotechnology and worked in academic research for a number of years down in St. Louis, up here at Northwestern. Really interested in sort of the science. Wasn't terribly good actually at the bench, but was really interested in the science. Got to learn a little bit more about what folks do on the business side. I was really interested, actually it was my last class in my master's program. I actually took a marketing class as part of my biotechnology program, as strange as that sounds. And that was sort of my first foray into anything commercial, anything business. Very interesting. Started to learn and network with folks who are on the business side of biotech and pharma. And actually through the Graham School came here and actually took a couple of classes at Booth as a non-degree student, just to learn, you know, what is business school all about. And I actually fell in love with sort of the culture of business school. And so decided to kind of leverage my science background and pursue my business degree here at Booth. I started off working in a very small consulting group. It's not even around anymore. It was called Illinois Technology Development Alliance. And it was a group, kind of a consulting group that worked with entrepreneurs in our community, trying to prop up entrepreneurship in our community. And that's really where I started learning about, what a business plan was, how to evaluate it, what do startup companies need to do as they grow up. And really just tried to leverage my science understanding with my business background to help some of these companies. Spent about 6 years after that at Baxter Healthcare in our innovation strategy group and our venture group. And these were, think of sort of mini companies within Baxter that we were trying to organically grow. So I had an opportunity to work on a couple of biotherapeutic programs there. And then spent some time at a group called Illinois Ventures, which is a venture arm of the University of Illinois. Again, working with faculty entrepreneurs trying to spin technologies out of the university. And then came to Matter, where basically I'm working with, again, having come from the industry side and the entrepreneurial side, trying to link entrepreneurs with industry in our community. One thing that we have in Chicago that's amazing is all of these resources. When you look at payers, when you look at pharma, you look at health systems, you look at physician associations, institutions, research institutions, best business schools in the country. It's amazing when you think about Chicago, all the resources that we have here. They aren't terribly connected well, though. And that's where I think Matter comes in, and some of the success that Matter has had over the last couple of years has been really linking those communities together. And the premise really there is, if you're an entrepreneur, an healthcare entrepreneur, IT entrepreneur, but you're interested in healthcare, you don't create those solutions in a bubble. You don't do it in a vacuum. You don't do it in a garage. You've got to be at the table with pharma, with health systems, with payers, with patients, providers. There are so many constituents in healthcare, and that's what makes it both challenging and very, very exciting as well. And so we help our entrepreneurs essentially make those connections.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Lehman, the Assistant Director of the UChicago Innovation Fund. I work helping put the first equity round of financing into startups based on university research, both at the University of Chicago, but also our national labs, Argonne, Fermi, and the Marine Biological Laboratory. I've been in this role for about 2 years, and my pathway into it is probably the most serendipitous and the least biotechy. So I started my undergrad undecided whether I wanted to be an aerospace engineer or a theologian. So I studied both mechanical engineering and theology. And the recession pushed me into theology because I was going to work for Caterpillar, and they said, sorry, we're laying off 10,000 people. So I studied theology abroad at Oxford University, and then came back and decided that I needed to make money. And bounced around between a couple different industries and focused mostly on social enterprise and social entrepreneurship in the emerging economies and in international development. My story led me eventually back to getting an MBA at Notre Dame, and that since then, the last 7-8 years, I've been working on putting together startups around deep technologies, mostly not healthcare until the last 2 years, but always founded on really deep intellectual property. Before coming to UChicago, I worked for a consulting firm here in the city called Ocean Tomo, and helped a bunch of different companies figure out how to take their intellectual property and make companies out of them, or to make other decisions to buy and sell intellectual property as needed. And I'm really interested in the early stages of turning a great idea into a company. What are the different factors that make an idea grow? How do you put the right team around it? How do you support it in all the right ways? I love doing that. And the last 2 years, I've just been super focused on getting up to speed in biotech. So I'm the person on the panel with absolutely no educational background, but who's deeply interested in the space and coming up to speed as quickly as I can.
Great. Thank you for those intros. I have a few of my own questions, and you can, I'll turn it over to the audience in a sec, and you can also put your questions on Join QA. One question that I always get, in my own startup, I've often faced I've often felt like I've been behind the 8 ball, not understanding term sheets and equity and vesting and seed rounds, and a lot of it's been, I feel like I'm learning it after the fact. I'm learning it too late. And at one point in my career, I thought, well, maybe I should get another degree. Maybe I should get an MBA or something. And I think I got good advice, right? People said, don't get an MBA, read a book, and you can. And everybody has their favorite book about starting a business. But I do think it's important to try to figure out what extra training should people get. So should people get MBA? Should they get public health master? Should they get statistics training? What do you recommend to people when they come to you and say, hey, I need to fill in some gaps? And an MBA seems like an easy way out, but what kinds of things do you tell them? I'm sure you all have a perspective on this, but Steve?
Sure, yeah. So one of my friends in the audience is a perfect example here, Tim, who's a Northwestern student who decided that he wanted to get some startup experience and didn't even let institutional allegiances get in his way from jumping into a startup. And he got involved with the program we ran last summer at the Polsky Center and jumped right into one of our startups called O2M, and just kind of open arms and said, I'm willing to do whatever needs to be done in order to grab the experience that I need to get. And I love getting that hands-on experience, much better than reading a book, definitely better than getting an MBA. He's just an awesome example.
Arun?
Yeah, so, I think especially in healthcare, as I sort of mentioned, there are so many different skill sets that are going to be needed. And so ultimately, you can't necessarily be an expert in all fields. And I think for everybody, it's a different formula. There's not a one size fits all. But I think what I've seen, where I've seen entrepreneurs excel, is where they have functional experience or expertise in one area. They are, whether it's finance, whether it's bioinformatics, whether it's accounting, whatever it might be, that piece of the puzzle and sort of the entrepreneurship puzzle, they own that. They're an expert in that. But then it's sort of the old cliche of you surround yourself with really smart people, right? And I think understanding things like term sheets, understanding the business side, understanding the bioinformatics side, I think exposing yourself to those areas, if those are not your functional areas of expertise, understanding enough about what's happening in the landscape to be able to have an intelligent conversation is important. Not necessarily a degree, but understanding when you're talking to somebody, okay, this is really where I need to build more expertise. I need an expert in bioinformatics, based on whatever it is you're building. So I think it's functional expertise in one area, having enough exposure of what's going on in the other areas, but then surrounding yourself with smart people that you trust who have that functional expertise to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I think this is where all these courses come into play because opportunity go out fast, and 2 years later, once you finish a degree, the opportunity is probably already gone. So timing is important. So I think you really want to get to know what you really need to know real quick. That's why these courses, Mentor also offer a lot of workshops, and there's a lot of courses online as well. And at some point, when your company grows a little bit bigger, you really want to work with, some dedicated resource. For example, if you are in an incubator, they will often offer accountant services and all that. So this is where you want to align all the resources around you. And this is where we want to help you to plug you into the ecosystem that the university or Mentor can provide.
Yet, despite all these resources, one of the most common problems I see is people come with ideas where there's a critical sector that they haven't engaged. And they'll say, we want to build the latest and greatest tool to do X, but they haven't talked to the physicians, or they haven't talked to the patients, or they haven't talked to the nurses. They have the tech all worked out, and they have built this beautiful app, but yet they haven't talked to one of the most critical stakeholders. And I think you touched on this in your opening comments. How do you sort of push groups in the right direction to make sure that they, in the right way, to say, hey, maybe you should get a doctor or a nurse or a technologist, whoever it happens to be on board on your company? I mean, you guys see this much more than I do.
Yeah, I would say from a resource standpoint, I think there are exercises that you go through to say, okay, if you're a technologist and you have an idea, typically you tend to be really focused on the technology, which is good. That's where you should be if that's where your expertise is. I found that when you go out and start talking with potential customers. That's one way to really figure out very quickly, is this the only person I need to be talking to, or are there other folks, other stakeholders in that puzzle that I need to be reaching out to? I think it's getting out of that shell to say, okay, I'm just sort of in a technology, lens. I've got a technology and they will come. Mm-hmm. But I think it's actually sort of pausing sometimes on the technology and saying, let me just go out and start talking to people. Start talking to customers, start talking to users. If I'm building something that I think ultimately will be sold into a hospital, let me go talk to a health system. Let me go talk to, and then even within a health system, it's not just the physician or the nurse. They might look at a technology very differently than a CFO or a CIO within the hospital might look at. So really understanding, without even knowing who the stakeholders are, if you're saying, I think this is something I want to go sell into a health system or something a hospital would buy, go talk to people in a hospital and go figure out, and not to pitch your idea, but to say, this is a problem that I've identified. Have you seen the same problem? Are you solving that same problem today? How are you addressing it? And you might be surprised with the answer. Some people might say, yeah, that's a problem, but we found a really quick workaround, and we don't need anything new to solve that. So you'll very quickly start to learn how people are approaching that problem, how they're solving it, and who the stakeholders are that really have a decision in whether that technology gets adopted. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you'll be surprised the people that you can actually get on the phone if you're gritty about it and you're willing to put yourself in uncomfortable positions. I totally agree. It's all about getting out there, engaging with the marketplace. There's so many cliches about this, but ideas don't survive their first contact with the real marketplace. So get out there and start cycling through and refining your idea as you talk to folks. One of the courses that we run at the Polsky Center, which Sam's been involved in, I think multiple times, is called I-Core. And one of the things that they say at the national I-Core level is you get bonus points if, as you're reaching out to the market, you get kicked out of a building, or you get pushed out of some sort of meeting, or you get roughed up a little bit, because that's what successful entrepreneurship looks like. It looks like forcing your way into the executive suite of a building. Now, you probably don't want to be doing that in a hospital setting, but getting out there, pushing into the meetings that you actually need to have. People generally are receptive if you're willing to take that gritty path and then ask the right questions.
Yeah, I've gotten pushed out of some pretty nice offices in my time from venture capitalists. One of the questions that came in was, what's unique to starting an informatics-based company versus, say, one that's based on biotechnology or a drug or something else? And what are some of the unique challenges that people face? Maybe you could all weigh in on this.
Right. I would say for informatics, I wouldn't say it's necessarily easier, but at least for example, the funds you need to jump up your startup, and sometimes it's easier to do the testing because there's a lot of things you can do online, like A/B testing and all that. It's easier to do some experiment to test it out and see whether this works. But it's often, I think the biggest challenge is it's often hard to find who is the person you really want to talk to. For example, if you are developing a drug, you're developing a cardiology drug, you want to talk to cardiologists. But when you're developing an informatics tool, a lot of people don't know who they should talk to in an organization, who would look at this product and say, this is what we need. So I think it's important to find your first group of customers. And I think later on we can touch base how you engage in academic medical center, which is where that you really want to talk to the person who really is gonna be the first user of your product, and who also in a position that can voice for you in the organization. And that's really how you get your product across and finally hopefully make a deal with the organization.
Yeah, I would say certainly the application is different, right? Bioinformatics tool versus a drug or a device. You have to think about, regulatory reimbursement. There are different issues there. Customer base is different. But I would actually argue that the process is really quite similar, right? A fundamental process of identifying a need, understanding how that's being addressed today, understanding what the workaround is for that problem today, how are folks addressing that, and understanding what the value proposition of your technology is. Are you really solving a problem? And it is a big cliche. A lot of people say, understand your market. And we sort of toss that out there as, just go understand your market. But it's surprising to me how few people really understand that or really do that well and really challenge themselves. Oftentimes, if I'm building a technology, I have bias, right? I'm going to go talk to the people who I think are going to agree with me and say that my technology is good and who are going to pat me on the back. And to Steve's point, you wanted to go talk to those people who say you're full of BS, right? You want to hear that challenge. So I think underlying process of building a company, of validating your solution, validating the need, talking to your customer, that process is almost the same, regardless of application. But as you start to think about the technical pieces of like the regulatory process, the reimbursement process, the sales process, right? Those obviously will differ a little bit from industry to industry.
Yeah, what I love about bioinformatics is that it can scale quickly. I look at a lot of pharma-related deals, a lot of biotech deals, and there are really neat things about all those different elements of healthcare innovation. But bioinformatics, you don't have to go through a lengthy FDA process, although the FDA is going to be involved in a lot of these products. The marginal cost to grow that type of business and to offer a new product is the marginal cost of code in a lot of aspects. And so oftentimes what you'll see is investors like bioinformatics deals for those reasons, and there's more access to capital as a result. So it's a really great space to be in. And particularly today, it's so exciting with personalized medicine, all these different trends that are coming together, and how we have all this massive data that we can actually use and bring medicine to a whole bunch of different people with smart code in a lot of cases.
So to follow on to that, can you say a few words about intellectual property? Because it seems like when it comes to IP, it's less clear with an informatics startup often what the IP is. When you have a drug, it's obvious that the drug, you're going to IP the drug and you're going to have a patent. And in early talks with investors, it was very frustrating because they would always ask, what's your IP? What's your IP? And sometimes you don't have IP, and I think that can be okay for an informatics startup, but I'm still wrestling with that. Can you give your thoughts about that?
Sure. Yeah, not having IP is absolutely okay. And really, I guess every company that's doing real innovation has IP. It just may not be patent IP. It may be a different type. It may be a trademark or a trade secret, copyright. Right? And there are a bunch of different ways that you can handle your IP, but the way you're going to succeed in a biopharmaceutical setting is by grabbing a patent and getting it through the FDA. If you've got a patent and you're through the FDA and you've got a reasonable thing that you're treating, you've succeeded. That's what it looks like. In a bioinformatics setting, when you're dealing with code, it's really about how quickly you can move, how compelling your product is, and how quickly you can address a market. And so speed is really going to be your ally more than locking down a space with patents. You can get software patents, but it's hard. It's really hard.
And getting harder.
And it's getting harder. There are some recent Supreme Court decisions that have really just made patenting in this space a lot harder. One thing that a lot of people don't know is 95, maybe 99% of patents that currently exist in the U.S. patent trademark system are completely valueless. Going after a patent doesn't mean you have anything valuable whatsoever. And it may not be the right strategy. Oftentimes, particularly in this space, it really is not the right strategy.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would add, making that a little bit of a broader point. What is IP? What IP is sort of a conversation that's had in the context of competitive differentiation. How are you differentiating yourself from the competition? And so as you start to think about that, there's a lot of other ways. IP is one mechanism to gain that differentiation. There's a lot of other ways that folks are thinking about doing that. Service delivery innovation, or business model innovation, or customer experience. Right? There are different ways that you can capture a customer and keep that as a sticky customer, as a loyal customer. So that's the challenge now for bioinformatics companies and other companies that are outside the traditional life sciences who have IP is to think about how do we be more creative about creating that differentiation for our product and our service. So thinking a little bit broadly about that will help you figure out, if you're in a space where there's limited IP, how best you can gain a competitive advantage.
So do people have to worry about sharing their ideas around. So I've never been one to require NDAs. We always sort of have this friend DA kind of mentality where it's just not been my culture in the group that I'm with to actually ask people ever to do that. But I notice it's, especially with larger corporations, they're always requiring these very onerous NDAs to put in place. Should people be afraid about giving talks and presenting their pitch everywhere they go?
I would say it depends, but it really depends. But mostly entrepreneurs are more, especially first-time entrepreneurs, are more cagey about sharing their ideas than they really need to be. Particularly, ideas, but no one's going to come in, take your idea, and out-execute you from the start if you're driven. And if the idea came from your brain, just the chances of that happening are very low. And so I'm the kind of friend DA mentality myself. I love to talk about the ideas that I have and that other people have too.
And if somebody else does it, it's market validation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of stories where the first person to do it is not the one that gets rich, right?
Totally, yeah. In the Valley today, they talk, first mover advantage. It's all about the second mover advantage, frankly. I think that's the way to go about it.
Are there questions out there? I've read one or two off of the online thing, but we can go ask questions. And if you don't have a mic, don't worry, I'll repeat the question if I hear it. Yep.
So the healthcare industry now is moving towards value-based reimbursement system, and I think that system is putting a lot of stress on healthcare providers. What type of, Informatics could potentially do a lot for these providers. What is out there in the current landscape of this area that is helping providers address or make their life easier with the regulatory changes that are currently occurring in the healthcare industry?
Right, so the question is, with value-based care becoming so important, is putting a great strain on providers to maintain all the regulation, and what sort of informatics solutions are emerging, whether they're coming from Epic and Cerner or whether they're coming from startups that you see making an impact in this area?
I really want to say a lot. So, and this is actually great for entrepreneurship per se, because whenever there's a problem, there's opportunity, right? So, because we are all sort of trying to figure out how we can survive this new payment model change, there's a lot of emphasis on quality, a lot of emphasis on improving the outcome, which creates a lot of room for different purposes. For example, from population health management type of tool, it can be telemedicine to increase the access, improve the quality, keeping patient away from the hospital. It can also be a number of different quality improvement initiatives in different departments to help them do their care or deliver their care better. So there's really a number of ways informatics can help in the new change of the payment model change.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think value-based care is really about if you're a physician today, there was a time in which a patient was in your hospital room, and for that 15, 20, 30-minute period of time, you were responsible for giving them a diagnosis and a treatment. They would walk outside the door, and they weren't necessarily your problem anymore. Value-based care is basically saying, look, that patient, this is not episodic care. This is sort of care outside the hospital. And the health systems and the providers are now being held accountable and responsible for the quality of care of that patient even as they leave the hospital. So what that means for physicians, what that means for health systems is we need to do a better job of tracking that patient, following that patient, measuring their diagnoses, understanding how they're responding to treatment. So things around data, things around connectivity, care coordination, these are the areas where a lot of people are trying to pay attention to say, how can we make the data inputs easier for physicians to continue to track these patients so that we can see how they're doing, so that we can limit readmissions within 30 days. So it's those types of sort of digital tools, data tools that are making all of it, sort of the health system smarter about patients, about what's working, what's not. To Kai's point about the population health side, that if I take a group of patients, how can I best treat them so that they're doing well outside the walls of the hospital? So it's really those types of tools and technologies that we're seeing a lot of people pay attention to and start to create.
And we struggle with the most rudimentary parts of this. So you would think, if a patient has a knee replacement at University of Chicago and they go back home to Rockford and get admitted to a rehab facility in Rockford a week later, you would think that it would be easy for us to keep track of these patients. We can't we're not even good at trying to disambiguate if it's the same patient that showed up at the rehab facility that we saw. So the very simple nature of having we don't have a universal healthcare identifier in this country, and so the simplest things we're having difficulties with, and we need to solve these through technology, and we will. But before we can tackle the harder things, we just have to get to the root of some of these very simple things that we have to track. So that's a great question. Another question out there?
Yep. I think there's a little bit of hysteria on some buzzwords sometimes. One of them is tech. Everybody's looking for a QC app to solve their problems. Now it's becoming big data. I'm not saying they're bad things. And another one is valuation. Even Cranes doesn't really explain some things as to, back to your point, Kai, about what business problem are you trying to solve? How are you going to leverage tech and or big data to solve that problem? How are you going to monetize it? What's the size of the market for that thing? And then eventually to justify the valuation. A lot of that is just lost. And even, when they talked about outcome health, for example, nobody really went through the dollars and cents as to how they're going to make money. They just said, oh, the valuation is billions of dollars, and next thing you just crashed and burned. And that's one of my biggest worries about this whole healthcare stuff, which is, I think it's great, but let's just be careful about it.
So for the folks listening online, if I can try to reflect back what you said, I think you're expressing a concern that people are getting so caught up in the hysteria around data science and big data and informatics that they're losing sight of the fundamentals of starting a business, which have to do with customers and stakeholders and the true valuation of a company. And how do we keep those in our sights and not get lost in sort of the hype of some of the work that we're doing? Is that fair? Yeah.
And just want to add that, one thing I always say in the class is that, because all my students are informatics students, and it's very easy for them to come up with something IT. So I said, when you face a problem, hold your internal desire to jump on some technology solution. Just really ask yourself, what's the best solution to the problem solved? Because a lot of times you will find it's actually a non-IT solution which is superior. And this just go back to my earlier point, like you can apply technology in a lot of things, but they are not necessarily the best solution. And eventually a market will decide what the best solution is. So you don't always need to come up with the best solution per se at the time being, but at least start with something that you think workable so you can share with others, get feedback, validate the problem first, and then gradually improve your solution with time and go from there. And it's very easy to get lost in the process about how much money I should get invested and how to run a company and all that. So it's a lot of things people need to take in. But I'm glad there's a lot of resources as well in the university to help with that.
Yeah, I would just add one point. It's a great point, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs fall in love with the idea that technology is the answer and is the solution. We had a program recently where we actually had a number of health systems and actually had a VP of quality of a health system at a roundtable, and he said this is the one thing he struggles with entrepreneurs is that everyone comes in and says, here's a technology solution that's going to basically take your job away, and obviate the need for you as a physician. And he says, well, think about that. If somebody came to you and said, I have a technology that will replace you, I'm not going to be really all that excited about seeing what you're going to do. And his point was, A, okay, that's not the right approach, but B, there's no technology that will fundamentally replace the relationship between a patient and a physician, right? And so when you think about technology solutions or new solutions, it's about things that enable that relationship, enable that conversation to be richer, to be more robust, to be more productive, to get the patient healthier. It's not a technology to replace that relationship.
So if somebody in Chicago has a healthcare startup, it's clear to me that if they want to reach physicians at UChicago, I think there's it's clear that some of these paths are worked out. But if they really want to have an impact over healthcare in Chicagoland, can you speak to how Matter and Polsky are approaching sort of thinking about Chicago as a region and how we can have an impact over lots of different areas and different health systems?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So the Polsky Center, I can just speak for our little neck of the woods down in Hyde Park. We love working with folks from different universities. one of the investments we made in our last cycle at the Innovation Fund was from IP coming out of Michigan State. We've got folks coming into our startups like Tim from Northwestern. And personally, I think that our ecosystem rises or falls based on Chicago winning in healthcare, in data science, and all these different fields. I have an inclination of a couple areas where I think we're going to be particularly well suited. And yeah, working together and preventing folks, or at least giving an alternative to folks who would otherwise go to Boston or to Silicon Valley, who can stay here and say, no, they're actually great opportunities because there's tons of startups coming out of Northwestern. There's tons coming out of the University of Chicago, UIC, IIT, they're all here. And one of the projects that we're working on at Polsky particularly is a research tower that's going to be going in 12 stories. I think 12 stories is where it is now, but bringing in wet lab space for entrepreneurs from across the city. And it's going to be anchored by the University of Chicago, but our thesis is that we do better by working together. And so for me, success looks like startups that have folks on the business team and the science team from all of the different institutions that make this city so great.
Yeah, I would add to that. So echoing kind of what I had mentioned before, I think when Matter was first born, the idea was that there are all of these rich resources in our community. And, when you go to Boston, you stand in a certain spot and you're looking at the Broad Institute, you're looking at, MIT, you're looking at Pfizer, Merck. You see all the industry players, in each other's labs, basically. And that's been one of the challenges that we've had in Chicago is, although we have all these resources, that connection really has not been there. And I think a little bit of the secret sauce of what we're trying to do is sort of at a small scale through roundtable conversations, small group conversations, is have an opportunity for industry to be at the table together, for industry and entrepreneurs to be at the table together. I mean, just think about this for a second. If you're developing a solution, you're an entrepreneur, and you're sitting at a table with someone from HCSC who's a payer, someone from University of Chicago on the health system side, someone from Takeda or Stellus on the pharma side, and these are the kinds of conversations that are bringing about the ideas of what are the needs and what are the solutions. And one of the most intriguing things that I found, and this is not lip service, I really do mean this, I think honestly our industry partners learn a lot more from our entrepreneurs than the other way around. I think entrepreneurs will certainly leverage the resources that industry has and the processes that they put together. But I promise you, having worked at Baxter, I can tell you, we would walk out of the room, after having an hour meeting with an entrepreneur, and we would look at each other and say, "Did you know that was going on? Did you know that that's the technology that's out there?" They're learning just as much, if not more, from the entrepreneurs. And so I think the more we have these interactions, and if Matter and Polsky can, we all serve as a hub together to engage and have more of those interactions, we're hoping that more and more of those partnerships and collaborations will happen. And we're starting to see that more and more at Matter, where we've got companies interacting and partnering and doing pilots with industry partners. So that's it's going to take a while, but that's the kind of partnership and collaboration that we're going to see going forward.
As you develop these industry partnerships, how do you protect the entrepreneur and protect their interests? Because I can see how the industry is always going to want to have exclusive rights. They're always going to want to retain IP. What resources are available to budding entrepreneurs so that they can go to Takeda and try to do a study together, but still make sure they're protecting themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there are, from a resource perspective, there's work and programs that we do with entrepreneurs, things like what we call product trial programs. So this is, if you're an entrepreneur and you're selling, and I'm just going to use the example of a health system, you want to sell into a health system. Part of it is through a program at Matter, which is, think of us as Switzerland, right? We're sort of the neutral place, we're helping to understand what are the endpoints that are important to that health system as they're doing pilots. How do they do pilots? How do they make decisions on that? And so having, facilitating interactions between startups and health systems, or if it's pharma companies, on how should we be setting up these pilots? How should we be doing these types of collaborations? So having sort of a safety net, if you will, that we work with entrepreneurs to go through that process is really important. And having our industry partners understand that when they become partners of Matter, they're also going through that process. They're also going to engage with entrepreneurs, and we're going to sort of collectively learn how to do these pilots going forward. So there will always be issues that come up in terms of rights, in terms of IP, but sometimes it's just laying the groundwork for a process of how we're going to work together in order to make it successful.
Great. Other questions out there? Yep.
This is a question for Steve with the Polsky Center. You guys are building a 12-story research facility. It's geared toward university-affiliated entrepreneurs, startups coming in. How about non-university? I mean, some of the folks hanging out at Matter.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure, so I don't want to answer that question with any specificity. But the goal for the whole building is to be as open as possible and to be a resource for Chicago. Exactly the vectors to get in, I can't answer right here, but I can find out and let you know right afterward.
Okay, it'd be a reciprocal question for Arun. With Matter, with the folks in there, it's a lot of IT in Matter. For those who need to validate their idea and use some sort of experimental lab space, do you partner with industry, or can you actually go to the universities and try to get something up and going for non-university Matter startup?
Yeah, there are, through partnerships that we have with universities, so a lot of even the, call it the non-university based startups out of Matter have some connection back to a university, whether it's the founding CTO or whatever it might be. There's typically sometimes a connection back to a university. And so we've often said, like, Matter is not a place where we're replacing, your university affiliation. That's actually very, very important. And so, for instance, when you come to Matter, we don't have wet lab space, and that's not a goal going forward. The goal is to say, look, you're doing technical work, within your university system, and you're coming to Matter to interact more with the industry partners to take advantage of more entrepreneurial resources that could be of value to you. But typically for the non-university companies, they have an affiliation back to a university. For those that completely don't and have developed their company, on their own, there are opportunities to then engage with either CROs or other industry partners to say, how can we do a small-scale pilot to do some of this work? But certainly, more so in the life sciences side, there's a lot more of a push to do contracting work outside for a lot of that work. So there's it's almost a virtual type of process.
Other questions?
If I may, I'd like to talk, one of the challenges when you've got a startup is reaching the right people. You've got to identify what level of the organization really needs to vet this out. You don't want to go too high because he's going to turn around to somebody below him, right? So my challenge has been, because I'm coming from manufacturing and I'm 25 years old and I'm solid there, so I'm bringing this new stuff to healthcare. But I've got to crack the nut at the CEO level, work with the hospital and the health insurer. I've got the hospital side pretty well covered. Now I'm trying to crack into the health insurance side. Don't you think there's a need for some kind of a clearinghouse? Because there's a lot of noise out there. There are thousands of ideas coming in. And there has to be a clearinghouse that somebody goes through all of these things and say, hey, you're not there yet, or you're going for the wrong person, this and that. But something where you'd be willing to pay to connect. To say, okay, you've got a valid thing here. And I think we should hook you up with so-and-so and so-and-so. Can you see Matter doing something like that? Because, that's something that would really add value. I'll tell you a little experience I had recently. I was at this hospital CEO's breakfast where there are 500-600 people. It's a gold mine for networking. So I dart over there to talk to one of the CEOs of the hospitals. And I thought, the guy didn't have too much time. So I gave him a very quick blurb. And I told him, I'm willing to post a stupidity bond to meet with you. And he said, what's that? And I said, I'll bring a blank check. if after our 1 hour meeting, you tell me this is a dumb idea, that check's yours. And he laughed and he said, that's not necessary, so he gave me his card. And I'm not trying to get through the door. But other than that, there's got to be institutions.
So I think the general question is, what sort of resources are available for people that are trying to, whether it's the insurance industry or the pharma tech industry, and I've seen this both at Matter and Polsky, that you guys do serve as matchmakers, and that's actually one of the primary functions of your groups, and for helping people navigate these different areas.
Yeah, and it's one of the biggest needs, right, for entrepreneurs. I completely understand that. You know, I answer it this way. I think as an incubator, there's a certain resource there that we need to deliver. And what I mean by that is, there are, let's say on the payer side, just to use your example, there are folks that we continue to meet who, let's say, come from the medical coverage side. So I recently met somebody who literally that is her job, is to understand when new technologies come in, how do they evaluate, how do they review, and how do they give some sort of medical coverage decision on those. That's really valuable for an entrepreneur to understand how that evaluation is done and to get that feedback. Those aren't sort of those people aren't walking around all the time, right? Part of it is also meeting those people. We are almost a startup ourselves, and so we're kind of doing the same thing that you're doing, which is we're hustling. We're trying to find those people to say, look, we've got 200 entrepreneurs who need this type of support. Here are the kind of people that we're looking for, and we're going to our industry partners and saying, this is what we need. So I would answer that as that is what we continue to do and strive to do and improve to do. Do we know absolutely everybody in every aspect? No, of course not. But where we can help, given who our partners are, we do our best to try and do that. And so we can certainly talk offline about some specific people. Become a Matter member, and you can. There you go.
So we're going to need to pause at 6 to let students go to class. So I want to ask a final question that each of you can answer, hopefully efficiently. If for somebody who just is starting out and has never done this and just wants to sort of get their feet wet a little bit, what can you each come up with sort of a simple thing that they can do to sort of take a step into this world and start to get more comfortable? So I don't care what order you go in, but each of you should weigh in.
So Sam, you're saying basically anyone with an idea or already have a product or like a company or like what level?
Yeah, so for you, if one of the other residents or fellows came to you and said, listen, I have an idea, I'm not quite sure if it's any good, I don't know anything about a startup, what would you tell them in terms of starting to get familiar with the world of startups?
So yeah, I would suggest them to reach out to different courses available over there. Like I said, there should be different courses as a primer. From in biotech, informatics, it doesn't really matter. There should be different type of introductory courses to help them guiding through the process. There's a lot of resources online as well. For example, there are Y Combinator. They have a very dedicated startup course online that you can look into as well. So there's quite a few resources, but I think the most important thing is still to find, like I said earlier, to validate the problem first and figure out whether this is something you really want to do. It's more important to figure out this is something you really want to work on and this is really a validated solution to the problem rather than spending a lot of time, learning about finances or, how to get funding and all that, because all of that can be secondary if the solution is not really a good solution to start with.
Yeah, I'd give the same advice somebody gave me when I first started at Booth. Network. And that's just going out and talking to people. And even if you don't even know what the questions are, start talking to entrepreneurs to get a sense of what day in the life of an entrepreneur, understand what they go through, talk to customers, talk to people. Courses are really important. I think that's as you figure out what it is you want to do and you're building knowledge, subject matter expertise, that's where courses come in. That's where, institutional knowledge comes in. But if you're just getting started and you're learning, get out there and talk to people as much as you can, even if you don't think they're related in any way to what you're doing, but go out and start talking to people. And that helps.
Yeah, variation on the same theme, be around. Be around where entrepreneurs are putting together products, where they're pitching. Be around the classes where entrepreneurs tend to gather. At least for the University of Chicago, it's be around the Polsky Center. The people who get on the interesting projects, and there are tons of interesting projects at the University of Chicago that need talent. The people that get on those are the ones that are just around and they demonstrate value. And a lot of the times it's, table stakes to just walk into the room are to just do something for free, help somebody out. If you help out enough people, eventually you're going to get into something that looks good, and you don't have to plot it all out, but just be around, add value, and look for things you can get involved in.
And I think having mentorship is really important, and finding a mentor that you can trust, that you can go to and say, listen, they just gave me this term sheet. I have no idea what it means. Is this a good deal? Somebody that you can really sort of lay it all out for and get some advice from has always been really important to me. And it's hard to find those people. And if you can find them, I'm sure you'll see them at Polsky and Matter. You can find those people. It's really helpful. So this is really useful. I'm really glad that you guys came together. Hopefully you can stick around a little bit and have walk-up questions. But for now, let's thank our panelists and let's take a break.